Hello from DC. Before we begin, Washington, D.C. occupies what was and still is the ancestral lands of the Nacotchtank or Anacostia and Piscataway people. Corn, beans, and squash once grew on Capitol Hill. Pottery has been unearthed on the site of what is now the White House, and burial mounds have been uncovered at Joint Base Anacostia Bolling. Today, there are roughly 4,000 Indigenous citizens of the District of Columbia representing not only local tribal communities, but also ones from all across the Americas. To learn more about the Nacotchtank and get involved in volunteer efforts with local members of the Piscataway tribe to gain recognition for the Nacotchtank history of the area, please visit the DC Native History Project at onceasitwasdc.org. So as Tim or Hans probably just said, I'm Vicky Johnson-Dahl, and I'm a Geographic Information Officer and Cartographer supporting USAID's Office of Transition Initiatives. This talk is not about that. I also play the drums. This talk is about that. So my work is in international development, which can be sort of bleak sometimes, and we all have our own ways of self-care. I love a good personal project, and truly the less useful the better. Measuring sandwiches, mapping newspaper football coverage, it's a wonderful waste of time. And it's also why I started to map drum patterns. In your program, there's some fancy sounding language about like invisible maps. That's not a total lie, but I really just started this because I couldn't go to the studio where I take drum lessons and practice during the pre-vaccine days of the pandemic. And I wanted to still make things with music, even though I wasn't really able to make music. This talk, you aren't gonna understand music in a different way or whatever. It's just fun to take information and make it do things it isn't designed to do. So setting out to find examples of music mapping, I found it mostly takes one of three forms. The first, maps of where to find certain types of music, like this one published by Standard Oil in 1949 as part of their weekly educational radio program to promote music appreciation in children. The second, musical genre mapping, which connects similar genres or artists. And the third, projects like Travis White's Cartographic Pleasures, maps inspired by Joy Division's Unknown Pleasures album art, mapping projects inspired by music. Now, it's sort of difficult to find maps of the music itself. This is speculation, because music is something you hear, and it's difficult to conceive of something so ephemeral as having a fixed location. You can map its origin, how it relates to similar sounds. You can apply aspects of it to the physical earth. But what about mapping the sound itself? Maps are typically, not always of course, but often used as visual aids. And what do you see? What do you picture when you listen to or make music? How can you visualize the experience of music? How can you map that? So yeah, during a session of Creative Carto, I began logging music notes as data points. And this started out pretty simple. During the 30-day map challenge, I made this for the non-map map day. And this non-map map just shows how often each part of the kit is played during a given song. In this case, First Date by Blink-182. There's inherent spatiality to drumming. It just takes up a lot of room. And I think there's actually a fair amount of drummers in NACIS. I've done no research on the topic, but I'd wager there's some solid overlap in cartographers and drummers. And I bring that up now while you're looking at past NACIS president Anthony Robinson's setup. Look at that enormous symbol. To have one of those in your home, I'm pretty sure that that's the dream, right? But I'm showing you this not because of that amazing symbol, but because there are lots of different ways to build the kit, including like endless symbols. But for the purposes of this talk, we're just going to go with the basics. So to set the area that we'll be mapping, this is the kit that I play on most often and the basis for most of the rest of the visuals. No frills, just the basics. And data-wise, if you can read regular sheet music, awesome. Throw it all away, because drum sheet music is different. There isn't really a scale per se. The note placement just refers to the different drums. So this is kind of a diagram of that. Hello, Copeland. After some consideration, I realized that the best way to make use of my short time with you all, with as little time explaining non-cartography topics as possible, was to focus on one piece of classic, widely beloved, well-known music with a memorable drum pattern. So I selected the seminal 2004 Kelly Clarkson banger, Since You've Been Gone. And if you aren't familiar with it, well, I felt a little skittish about putting audio clips in the presentation itself. I don't want NACIS or the good folks at E3 to get like DMCA'd or whatever. So I prepared an annotated version of the talk, complete with audio links, which you can view at vcj.github.io/drums. Click on over there. There's some bonuses that I couldn't fit into the talk, like a rendering of what it looks like to sit on a bunch of Dixie cups. I don't know. Get some coffee, pop over to one of the other sessions. I already recorded this. It's fine. I won't know. So hopefully that's enough background on drumming for the rest of this talk to work. Now I started out by sketching out the drum kit and assigning coordinates to each drum. Then I went through the written sheet music, looks like this, and tracked whether the drum was struck by the stick in my right or left hand or right foot in the case of the kick drum pedal. And that produced this, which doesn't look like a lot of variation. In fact, it really doesn't look like much at all. So let's zhuzh it up a little bit. And this is what it looks like animated, with a couple of other features as well. Color for the part of the song and a flashing dot for each bass beat. And a brief aside for a little practical cartography here. This might be something else everybody already knows and does all the time, but it was new to me and I was delighted with it. So this is new to you too. It's actually pretty easy to take an existing map, or in this case, non-map map, and create an animation over it. Take an image in PNG format, put it into R, there's a package for that, overlay a grid, package for that too. Note the X and Y coordinates and use that to plot your animation with ggplot and ggAnimate. There's a little trial and error with getting the coordinates where you want them. I wouldn't want to do this for something with like 10,000 points, but it's a neat way of working with cartography if you can't or don't want to do it in R. Like, here is a Pan Am route map from 1978 with a little bit of simple animation. Just 3 dots, but it looks kind of cool. And sure, you could do this in InDesign, but R is free. So back to the drumming. This is what my right and left hands and right foot are doing when I play Since You've Been Gone. It's a micro route map, and it's just showing how I'm navigating the setup. If these were real on-the-ground coordinates, we need like 7 or 8 decimal places to get this kind of accuracy. And sure, there's no north arrow, but as we all know, north is a societal construct. Now, a given piece of music, a song to me, is fairly linear. It has a start, it has an end, and there's a progress of things that happen in between. And all that stuff in between, that has, if we don't want to approach this as literally as a route map, we can take another angle. We can assign everything weight based on frequency, tone, beat. All of this can be visualized. And earlier, I was going to pose a question about what you see when you hear or make music. For me, it's highs and lows. And I don't mean emotionally, although there are those too. I mean, if there's a lot of bass drum, that's just a deeper tone. A lot of hi-hat, that's a higher tone. And the more I hit a particular drum or cymbal, the bigger that sound is, if that makes sense. But this is a cartography talk, so let's talk about cartography. Going back to Travis White's transect maps for a moment, I've always liked the sketch he included in the Cartographic Perspectives article, in particular the elevation transect at the bottom. It conveys a very nice, very clear line from one end of Crater Lake to the other. And when you're looking at something from the side, clarity in what you're looking at is helpful. But sometimes that through line isn't so nice and clear. Sometimes it's messy and jumbled and there's just a lot of them. It's all crammed together. It can get a little nonsensical, like this page from the Entschuldigung, ich spreche nur ein wenig Deutsch. Handatlas der allgemeinen Erdkunde, Länder und Stadtkunde und Aktekarten, or Handatlas of General Geography, Country and National Studies in 80 Maps by George Leonhardt Bauerkeller and Ludwig Einwald. I found this while browsing the David Rumsey map collection, and you've always got to read the publication notes in there because they really tell it like it is. Considered by authorities to be one of the most beautiful atlases of the 19th century, it is particularly noteworthy for its quality registration, sharp images, use of brown for relief and solid blue for water, multicolor lithography, and its scope of content. Particularly noteworthy presentations being maps, diagrams, and illustrations of glaciers in the Alps, an elevation diagram of major mountains and sea depths, a map of Switzerland with relief depicted with hatchers and giving shaded relief 3D effect. Most of the text planned to accompany the maps was never completed. The atlas was largely ignored by contemporary and subsequent scholars despite its high quality. I guess using blue for water had to be notable at some point. This chaotic imaginary landmass of every tall mountain on the earth is great. But let's take a look at one of the other beautiful but ignored elevation diagrams. These two Germans were way into cross-section panorama-style visuals. And like I was saying, kind of about nonsensical, I feel like most typical visuals like this will take you across a single transect. And these Germans crammed the entire known planet into this one. And I feel like that's kind of hard to see. So this being the North American Cartographic Information Society, let's take a look at that North American cartographic information. And I was just so taken by the unusual angle and juxtaposition of these features, where the point is not to show you how it is, but just to show you how it relates to everything else. I felt a similar approach would serve me well here. And I was putting this talk together at the same time as I was reading Jer Thorpe's book, Living in Data. Early on, like page 15, he mentions what he calls question farming, which he defines as using visualization not to simplify something, but to unfurl its complexities in interesting ways, exposing things that weren't before able to be seen. Here, you could say, I guess I farmed the question, what if Since You've Been Gone was a mountain range mapped by those Germans? Which took me back to R to get the baselines, pun intended, of course. A little arithmetic gave me the number of hits per drum per section. And I used that to make this weird little map. Here, the height or depth represents the frequency, while the width and general shape represents beat distribution. The color doesn't mean anything. I just like bright colors. And I go back and forth with this one between thinking it's like super cool and indicative of how the drum part would look if it were landforms, and also thinking it looks like a toddler's mistake. But it's a fair representation of what I'm picturing when I'm playing and listening to the song, or at least the drum part of the song, a map of the linear progression through the piece with elevation or depth assigned by frequency. So there you have it, a handful of different ways to make cartography out of percussion. Thanks for watching, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day at NACIS.